Facing the young girl and her little sister, the armored knight raised his sword. To have mercy was to take away a life in a single strike. Struck by the sunlight, the sword glistened high up in the air. The girl shut her eyes and bit down on her lip. Her expression showed that she never wished for this situation. She was simply accepting it, since there was nothing she could do. If the girl had power of some sort, she would have used it on the man before her eyes and ran away. But the girl had no such power. Thus, there existed only one conclusion. The girl would surely perish here. The sword struck down, yet she did not feel any pain. The girl opened her tightly shut eyes. The first thing that the girl saw in her world was the sword that had stopped in its path downward. The next thing that entered her sight was its wielder. He had stopped in motion, as though he were encased in ice. The knight's attention was no longer on the girl. The completely defenseless state of the knight clearly revealed the shock that surged inside him. As though led by the knight's gaze, the girl also turned her face toward the same direction. Then, she saw despair. There was darkness. Pure darkness, as thin as paper, yet of an unfathomable depth. It had emerged from the ground in an ovoid shape with its lower section cut. A scene that evoked mystique with indescribable apprehension. A door? That's what the girl thought after having seen it. Then, after her heart beat once more, her thought was verified right. Something fell from the darkness. The instant she realized what it was, the girl let out a piercing shriek, an existence that no mortal could ever overcome. Red orbs swayed like turbid flames inside the hollow orbs of the white skull. As it looked at the two girls, they felt as though it was staring coldly at its prey. In its hands, devoid of flesh and skin, was a sacred yet fearsome staff of sovereign beauty. It was as though death itself, draped in an ornate jet-black robe, was born into this world, with darkness from another world. The air froze in the blink of an eye. It was as if time itself had frozen before the advent of an absolute being. The girl had forgotten to breathe, as though her soul was stolen. In this situation, where even sense of time seemed to have vanished, the girl began hyperventilating and breathed as though gasping for air. The Grim Reaper has come from the other world to take me away. That's what the girl had thought. But she soon felt something was amiss. The knight that was after them had stopped moving as well. A quiet groan was heard. Who was it from? It felt like it could have been from herself, as well as her shivering little sister, and the knight with his sword raised before her eyes. Ever so slowly, its fingers, destitute of flesh with only their bones, reached out and pointed. Not at the girls, but at the knight, as if to grab something. She wanted to stop looking, but she was too scared to do so. She felt she would witness something far more terrifying if she were to look away.
Grasp hard!
The death incarnate made a clasping gesture, and a loud metallic noise rang right next to the girl. She was afraid to avert her eyes to death, but pushed by the tiny curiosity from her heart, she moved her gaze and saw the knight laying on the ground. He was no longer moving. He was dead. Yes, dead. The life-threatening crisis that had closed in on the girl disappeared just like that, as if it was all a joke. However, she could not rejoice, since death had changed its shape and manifested itself in a more apparent form. Receiving the girl's frightened gaze, death moved towards the girl. The darkness, gathered in the center of her view, rose.
It's going to envelop me.
Thinking that, the girl hugged her little sister tightly. The thought of escaping was nowhere in her head now. If the opponent were a human, she could have taken action with a shred of hope. But the thing before her eyes was an existence that easily blew away such notion.
Please, at least let me die a painless death.
Praying was all she could do. Her little sister was clinging to her waist, quivering in terror. She wanted to save her, but she couldn't. She could only apologize for her powerlessness. She simply prayed that she wouldn't feel so lonely, for she was going with her. And then...
Can someone give me the answer to my question? Where's my soul? It's like a virus in my body while I'm dreaming. When I wake up, all that's left of me are bones. I'm in a panic, get out of reach. Oh, there are mysteries and any miseries. Dead or alive, I'm on the brink of self-destruction. As I'm roaming from nothing right to hell. An invitation to come disappear. When dancing 1, 2, 3 steps on this dark stage. Raise your flag, march your fight, break your mask and show some pride. While this wonder sends a shiver down my crooked spine. Wars and swords, tears and blood fill my heart begin to raise. As I laugh in this path we made. Can someone give me the answer to my question? Where's my soul? Where's my heart? Am I losing myself? Don't you hesitate, you're this way. I don't know and I don't care. Tell me, are you not entertained now? I'll just keep surviving, I just cannot hide it all. I am not the full victim, I'll continue living in this misery-driven world.
It was the year 2138 AD, and the term DMMORPG was not only in existence, but also becoming more common. Being the acronym for Dive Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game, it described an interactive game where one was able to play in a virtual world like it was real life, by connecting a dedicated console to the Neuron Nano interface, an intracerebral nanocomputer network composed from the quintessence of cyber and nanotechnology. It was as though you entered the game for real. Amidst a myriad of DMMORPGs that were developed, there was one title that shined brilliantly: Yggdrasil. It was a game that a highly regarded Japanese developer released 12 years ago in the year 2126. No matter which DMMORPG it was compared to, Yggdrasil was a game that offered an immensely high level of freedom to the players. The number of classes that formed the basis of the game easily topped 2,000 when you added up the normal and high rank classes. All classes had a maximum level of 15, meaning a player had to have at least 7 classes or more to reach the overall level cap of 100. Furthermore, you were able to just have a taste of various classes as long as you satisfied this overall condition. Although it was inefficient, it was possible to have 100 level 1 professions if you wanted. In other words, it was a system where it was impossible to have completely identical characters unless you intentionally made them so. This level of freedom also applied to the visuals. If you used creator tools that were sold separately, you were able to alter appearances of weapons and armor, interior data, character visuals, and detailed settings of a player's home. What awaited the players who set off for adventures in such a world was a colossal map. 9 home worlds consisting of Asgard, Alfheim, Vanaheim, Nidavellir, Midgard, Jotunheim, Niflheim, Helheim, and Muspelheim. A vast world, innumerable classes, and fully customizable visuals. It had ignited the artisan spirits of the Japanese players and caused a phenomenon that would later be called visual popularity. With such explosive popularity behind it, it had reached a level of acclaim where Yggdrasil and DMMORPG were considered as one and the same in Japan. Alas, that was a story of a generation past. A grand, round table of obsidian luster was in the center of the guild hall, surrounded by 41 luxurious seats, but most of them were vacant. Only 2 silhouettes were visible now where all the members once used to sit. One wore an elaborate jet-black academic gown adorned with gold and violet edges. The decoration around its neck seemed somewhat excessive, but strangely, it was rather fitting. However, the head that should have been sitting above the lavish collar was nothing more than a skull, devoid of skin and flesh. There was a dark red glow inside the empty eye sockets, and a dark halo-like object glimmered behind its head. The other individual sitting in another seat was not a human either. It was a lump of black goo. Its surface, reminiscent of coal tar, quivered and never maintained a consistent shape even for a second. The former was an overlord that ranked top even among the elder liches, magic casters who had turned into the undead in the pursuit of ultimate magic. The latter was an elder black ooze, a race with powerful acidic abilities that were close to the strongest among the slime types. Yet, they were not monsters. They were player characters. The selectable races in Yggdrasil were divided into 3 diverse categories. Classic humanoid races such as humans, dwarves, and elves. Demi-human races with hideous appearances such as goblins, orcs, and ogres, favored for their physical prowess. And the heteromorphic races, who possessed monster abilities and higher stats than any other races, but were given restrictions in various aspects. If you include the high-tier races for these 3, the number of all the races reached a total of 700. Of course, Overlord and Elder Black Ooze were one of the high-tier heteromorphic races that players were able to pick. Between those 2 people, the Overlord talked without its mouth moving. Despite being the previous generation's top DMMORPG, it was technologically impossible to change expressions to go with the conversation.
It's been a really long time, Herohero. Even though it's the last day Yggdrasil's servers are open, I didn't expect you to actually show up.
For real. Long time no see, Momonga.
The Elder Black Ooze replied with the voice of an adult male, but in comparison to the Overlord, there was no trace of what could be called vigor or liveliness.
It's been since you've changed jobs IRL. So, how long ago was that? 2 years?
Yeah, about that. Jeez, it's been that long? Damn. My sense of time's messed up from working so much overtime.
That sounds rough. Are you doing okay?
My health? It's pretty much in tatters. Not doctor visit level, but pretty close. I just want to run away from it all, but I gotta eat. So I'm working my ass off, getting whipped like a slave.
Yikes.
The Overlord, Momonga, tilted his head back and made an irritated gesture.
It's seriously awful.
Herohero's gloomy voice, laden with an incredible sense of reality, flew towards Momonga as if to inflict a follow-up strike. His complaint in regards to work in the real world accelerated further. Stories about impotent subordinates, plans that were completely altered overnight, criticism from his superior for failing to meet his quota, days pulling all-nighters due to shitloads of work, abnormal weight increase from his ruined biorhythm, the growing number of drugs with each passing day. Eventually, the conversation turned one-sided as Herohero's gripe burst out like a broken dam. There are a lot of people who avoid talking about reality in the virtual world. The feeling of not wanting to drag the real world into the virtual world was understandable. However, the 2 people here did not think that way. The Guild, a team formed, organized, and operated by an assembly of players that they belonged to, Ainz Ooal Gown, had 2 rules for joining. First, you have to be a working member of society. Secondly, you had to be of a heteromorphic race. Due to the nature of the guild, there were many cases where complaints about work in real life became the topic, and this was accepted by the guild members. It could be said the conversation these 2 were having was an everyday scene in Ainz Ooal Gown. After a good amount of time had passed, the words of grievance from Herohero's mouth came to a halt.
Sorry, I don't mean to just whine, but I can't really talk about this stuff IRL, you know?
Herohero wiggled what appeared to be its head as if to bow. In response to this, Momonga quickly replied,
Don't worry about it, Herohero. You accepted my invitation to come tonight even though you're exhausted. so listening to some complaints is the least I can do. I'll take as many as you got.
Compared to earlier, a faint laughter with a bit more vigor was heard from Herohero.
Really, though. Thank you, Momonga. I'm glad I was able to log in today and see you after so long.
It makes me glad to hear you say that.
But I should probably get going soon.
Herohero's tentacle moved in the air as if it was touching something. He was operating his console.
Yeah, it's getting late. Sorry, Momonga.
Momonga sighed softly to conceal the emotions that had risen inside him.
Ah. That's too bad. Time really does fly when you're having fun.
I really wanted to stay to the end, but I'm just too tired.
Yeah, I can imagine. Log out and rest up.
I'm really sorry, Momonga. No, Guildmaster. What are your plans?
I think I'll hang around until the forced logout when the servers shut down. There's still some time left, so there's a chance someone else might show up.
I see. Honestly, I was surprised this place even still existed.
At this sort of moment, it was truly a good thing that there was no ability to show facial expressions, because if there was, one would have seen his grimace in a single glance. Momonga closed his mouth shut to suppress the sudden surge of emotions, since they would be revealed in his voice. He had desperately maintained the guild because they had created it together, so it was only natural for him to be overwhelmed with indescribable sentiments when such words were spoken by one of his comrades. But those sentiments were dispelled by what Herohero said next.
As the Guildmaster, you kept it going so that we could come back any time, didn't you? I really appreciate that.
Well, we all built this place together, you know? Making sure members come back any time is the Guildmaster's job.
I think having you as our Guildmaster was what made this game so fun for us. I hope to see you again. In Yggdrasil too.
I haven't heard any rumors about a sequel. But, yeah, I hope so too.
If it happens, let's definitely play together. Anyhow, I'm falling asleep here, so I'm gonna log off. I'm glad I got to see you at the end like this. It's been great playing with you.
For a moment, Momonga was left speechless. However, he gave his final words right away.
I'm glad I got to see you too. Nice playing with you.
A smiling emoticon appeared above Herohero's head with a glint. Since there was no ability to change facial expressions in Yggdrasil, players utilized emoticons to express their emotions. Momonga operated his console and selected the same emoticon. Then, Herohero's final words were heard.
Let's meet again. IRL.
The last one of the 3 guild members who showed up today vanished. Erasing all trace of the visitor, the silence returned to the guild hall. A silence devoid of memories and emotions. Looking at the chair that Herohero was sitting in just a few seconds ago, Momonga spat out the words he was going to say at the end.
Hey, I know you're tired, but it's the last day the servers are shutting down. Why not just stay into the end?
Of course, there was no reply. Herohero had already logged out to the real world.
Oh.
Momonga let out a sigh deep down from his heart. He could not bring himself to say those words. The fact that Herohero was always tired was sufficiently evident by the mood from their brief conversation. But Herohero saw the mail that he sent and showed up today, for the final day in Yggdrasil. He should be thankful for that alone. Wanting more than this would go beyond being shameless to being a nuisance. Momonga stared at the seat where Herohero was until a while ago, and then he looked around. What he saw were the 39 chairs where his old comrades used to sit. After a quick look around, his eyes returned to Herohero's seat once again.
Let's meet again, IRL?
Let's meet again someday. See you again. He had heard such phrases time after time, but the instance of them actually keeping their words almost never happened. Nobody had returned to Yggdrasil.
Just Where and when are we meeting again? Don't fuck with me!
With a furious shout, he slammed his hands on the table. Having judged the action as an attack, the system calculated countless variables such as Momonga's bare-handed damage and the table's structural defense, and displayed its result where Momonga hit with the number 0.
This is the great underground tomb of Nazarick! We built it together! How can you all abandon it so easily?
What followed after his fierce fury was desolation.
No. I know that's not right. I know it wasn't easy at all. They were just forced to choose between reality and a daydream. It's not something they could help. No one betrayed us at all.
Momonga muttered as though persuading himself and stood up from his seat. He walked towards the wall with a single staff hanging on it. Having the Greek god Hermes Caduceus as its motif, the staff was entwined by 7 serpents. Each of the squirming serpents' mouths held a jewel of a different color. Its grip had a transparent quality like crystal and was emitting a bluish-white light. The staff of supreme quality was a guild weapon that each guild can possess only one, and it was an item that could be said to be the symbol of Ainz Ooal Gown. Originally, guild masters were supposed to carry it with them, so why was it hanging on the wall in the room as a decoration? That was because it was an existence that symbolized the guild. The destruction of a guild weapon signified the dissolution of the guild. That was why guild weapons were stored in the most secure location in many cases, with their powerful abilities never seeing the light of day. Even a prominent guild like Ainz Ooal Gown was no exception. For this reason, the staff was never handed to Momonga, despite it being custom-made for him, and instead was adorned on the wall. Momonga reached out his hand for the staff, but he stopped halfway. At this very moment, even though Yggdrasil's service shutdown was near, he felt hesitation towards the act of debasing the glorious memories that they had made together. The days they spent together adventuring repeatedly in order to create the guild weapon. Those good old times of dividing up into teams and gathering materials as though it were a contest, arguing over what its appearance should be like, and combining everyone's suggested idea and making it little by little. They were the heydays of Ainz Ooal Gown, the times where they were most glorious. There was a person who went as far as to strain his overworked body to show up. There was even a person who showed up after having a big fight with his wife due to him neglecting time with his family. There was also a person who laughed saying he took paid leave. There were times where they spent the whole day chattering, getting worked up over idle stories. There were days where they planned their adventures and swept up the treasures. There were times when they went on raids and captured hostile guilds' castles. There were days when they destroyed every hidden boss monster that they could find. They had found countless undiscovered resources. They had placed various monsters in their base and cleared out invading players. But now there was no one. 37 out of 41 people have quit, and though the remaining 3 remained as guild members in name, Momonga could not recall the last time that they'd shown up with the exception of today. Momonga opened the console and accessed the official data where he searched for the guild's ranking. At one point, they had stood at rank 9 out of a little over 800 guilds, but now they dropped to 29th. Still, this wasn't so bad in comparison to rank 48 when they were at their lowest. The reason why the guild was able to maintain its rank was not due to Momonga's exploits, but thanks to the items left behind by his old comrades, the relics of the past. Although it was very much a guild in ruins now, there was a time where it shined. The fruit of those times, their guild weapon, the staff of Ainz Ooal Gown. Momonga did not wish to drag the weapon filled with their glorious memories into this time of ruins. However, a contrary feeling was ablaze inside of him. All this time, Momonga had placed importance on majority vote. Although he was in the position of guild master, what he actually did was miscellaneous work like contacting people. That was why, in this moment with nobody around, the thought of wanting to use his authority as the guildmaster crossed his mind for the first time.
I can't do it looking like this.
Muttering to himself, Momonga started operating his console to equip his avatar with armaments befitting his position as a prominent guildmaster. Armaments in Yggdrasil were classified according to their data size. The greater the data, the higher the grade of the weapon. Starting from the bottom, the classes were Lesser, Minor, Medium, Major, Greater, Legacy, Relic, and Legendary. But right now, Momonga was armed to the teeth in the highest class of them all, Divine. On his fleshless fingers were 9 rings, each imbued with different powers. Furthermore, his necklace, gauntlet, boots, cloak, and circlet were all divine class. Just their prices alone, every one of them were masterpieces of tremendous worth. A brilliant gown hung from the shoulder pieces, and a rippling dark red aura rose from his feet. Although the aura was turbulent and sinister, it was not Momonga's skill. He had simply embedded a chaotic aura effect into the robe, since there was some space left over in its visual data capacity. Touching it was perfectly harmless. Numerous icons popped up in the corner of Momonga's field of vision, indicating that his abilities have increased. Having changed his gear and armed himself from top to toe, Momonga nodded in satisfaction with his current equipment, befitting of a guildmaster. Then he reached out his hand and grabbed the staff of Ainz Ooal Gown. The moment he held the staff in his hand, it spewed out a vortex of dark red aura. Sometimes it formed the face of a human in agony and crumbled away. It was so vivid that it felt as though you could hear their voices of pain.
Maybe we went a little overboard.
The supreme staff that he had never held even once after its completion finally fell into the hands of its original owner with the end of Yggdrasil's online service ahead of him. Verifying the icons indicating dramatic increases in his stat again, he also felt a slight loneliness.
Should we get going, symbol of our guild? No, that's not it. Let's go. You're a testament of our guild.
Momonga left the room named the Round Table. Any guild member wearing the guild ring would automatically log into this room, unless there were special circumstances. If there were any other members coming back, they would definitely appear here. However, Momonga knew well that the other members would no longer return here. During the last moments of the great underground tomb of Nazarick, only Momonga was left. Repressing his turbulent emotions, Momonga silently entered a vast foyer. A world of grandeur and brilliance reminiscent of a giant castle clad in marble. Suspended from the high ceiling, evenly placed chandeliers could be seen emitting a soft, warm glow. The smooth floor of the wide corridors reflected the lights from the chandeliers above, shining luminously like a mosaic of bright stars. If the doors along the corridor were opened, the luxurious furniture inside the rooms would attract the eyes of many. If players who have heard the name Nazarick came here, they would have been stunned for sure by the fact that such beautiful sights existed in a place known for its infamy. After all, the great underground tomb of Nazarick overcame the largest player-organized military offensive in the server's history. An alliance of 8 guilds, guild affiliates, mercenary players, and NPC mercenaries, numbering a total of 1,500 people, tried to raid this place, and were annihilated. That event turned this location into a legend. The great underground tomb of Nazarick used to have only 6 floors, but it underwent a major reconstruction after being occupied by Ainz Ooal Gown. Now it stretched over 10 floors, each with its own characteristics. Floors 1 through 3, the catacombs. Floor 4, underground lake. Floor 5, the glacier. Floor 6, the jungle. Floor 7, the underground volcano. Floor 8, the wilderness. Floor 9, the royal suite. And floor 10, the throne room. The last 2 floors were the base of Ainz Ooal Gown, one of the top 10 guilds in Yggdrasil. Momonga's footsteps echoed in the royal suite's passage, followed by the tapping of his staff. After a few turns around the corners of the wide hallway, Momonga saw a woman in the distance moving towards him. She had a luscious blonde hair down to her shoulders, and well-defined features. She was wearing a maid outfit, including a large apron and a long skirt. At a height of about 170 centimeters, she had a slender body with a full chest threatening to spill out of her clothes. Overall, she gave a virtuous and elegant impression. As the two of them approached each other, the maid stepped aside and bowed deeply to Momonga. In response, he slightly raised his hand. The maid's expression did not change. Her face was showing the exact same unsmiling face as before. Facial expressions did not change in Yggdrasil. However, there was a difference between the unchanging expressions of players and this maid. The maid was a non-player character, or NPC. Within the game, these artificial intelligences only move according to their program. In other words, they were the same as moving mannequins, and even its bow to Momonga was just a pre-programmed action. His greeting earlier could be seen as a waste of time, but Momonga had a reason why he didn't treat them with disrespect. All 41 maid NPCs working in the great underground tomb of Nazarick were based on different illustrations by a guilder member, who had lived off his artwork and was now a manga artist serialized in a monthly manga magazine. Momonga gazed not just at the maid's appearance, but also at her astonishingly elaborate uniform. Especially the exquisite embroidery on the apron was the subject of admiration. Since it was illustrated by a person who boasted that a maid's best weapon is her uniform, the level of detail on the outfit was far beyond normal. Momonga couldn't help feeling nostalgic when he recalled how the guild member who was responsible for her visual rendering would start to scream at the task.
Ah, right. Even back then, he was all about maid uniforms for great justice. Actually, even the manga he's doing right now is a maid as the heroine. Are you making your assistants cry with all the detail work, Whitelace?
As for its behavioral program, it was created by Herohero and 5 other programmers. In other words, this maid was created from the hard work and joint efforts of the past guild members, so ignoring her was a little out of the question since, like the staff of Ainz Ooal Gown, she was also a part of his precious memories. As Momonga was thinking about these things, the maid tilted her head as if to ask what's the matter. As long as someone was close to her for a certain period of time, the maid automatically adopted this position. Recollecting his memories, Momonga was amazed by Herohero's meticulous attention to detail. There should be a few other hidden positions programmed in as well. Although he wanted to see all her postures, there wasn't much time left. Momonga's eyes turned to the semi-spherical holographic clock displayed on his left wrist and confirmed the current time. Indeed, there was no time to idle around.
Thank you for your hard work.
Momonga said this phrase of farewell filled with many sentiments and walked past the maid. Of course, the other side did not respond. Nevertheless, Momonga believed that a farewell was in order since it was the last day. Leaving the maid behind, Momonga moved on. Before long, a giant staircase with a luxurious red carpet covering the middle appeared before him. Momonga slowly walked down the flight of stairs and reached the 10th floor, the lowermost floor in the great underground tomb of Nazarick. The place he arrived at was a wide, open lobby with a few servants waiting for him. The first servant to catch his attention was an elderly butler dressed gracefully in his traditional uniform. His hair was entirely white, just like his immaculate beard. But the old man's back was straight as an arrow and strong as a steel sword. He had visible wrinkles on his hollow face, which made him seem gentle in appearance, but his eyes were as sharp as an eagle after its prey. Following behind the butler like shadows were 6 maids. However, their equipment was completely different than what the earlier maid had. Their hands and feet were covered in gauntlets and greaves decorated with gold, silver, and black metals. Donned in armors with a maid uniform motif, they wore white headdresses instead of helmets. Each maid was holding a different type of weapon, establishing the image of a maid warrior. Their hairstyles were also quite different from each other. Buns, ponytail, straight hair, braids, curls, French twist, etc. But something they all had in common was their transcendent beauty. Additionally, the maids were divided into types such as flirty, sporty, traditional, and other personalities. Although they were NPCs, and their designer had made them all playful and unique, their main purpose was to fight intruders. In Yggdrasil, guilds in possession of a base equivalent to a castle or greater were given several special benefits. One of these benefits were NPCs that guarded the base. The undead monsters in the great underground tomb of Nazarick fell under this category. These so-called spawn NPCs had a level cap of 30 and respawned automatically at no cost after a fixed period of time, but since it wasn't possible to change their appearance and AI programming, they did not pose much of a threat against any other intruding players. On the other hand, another special benefit was the power to create an original NPC. When a guild takes over a base with a castle-level rank, they could create NPCs with a collective maximum level of 700. Since the highest level was 100, you could create a maximum of 5 level 100 and 4 level 50 NPCs as an example. When creating an original NPC, in addition to their appearance and AI, it was even possible to change their armors and weapons. This allowed a guild to create far stronger NPCs and assign them to guard key locations. There was no need to create these NPCs with combat in mind. Another guild who occupied a castle, the Great Cat Kingdom, turned all their NPCs into cats or other feline creatures. It could be said a guild was given the exclusive right to create the image and atmosphere of their castle. Looking at the butler and the maids bowed down before him, he brought his hand to his chin. Since he had always used teleport to move from room to room, Momonga didn't come here very often, which caused him to look at them somewhat nostalgically. Momonga's hand operated the console, opened a page that was only accessible to guild members, and activated one of the options. As he did, the names of the servants appeared above their heads.
Ah, so that's what you're called.
Momonga had forgotten this name. He made a bitter, yet nostalgic smile as he recalled the disputes he had with his companions over deciding the name for this NPC. Sebastian, the butler, also served as the house steward. The 6 maids next to Sebastian were under his direct command, the combat maid unit called the Pleiades. In addition to them, Sebastian had several manservants and assistant butlers under his supervision. The text log had a more detailed setting, but Momonga wasn't in the mood to take a closer look. There was little time left until the servers shut down, and he wanted to sit down somewhere else. All NPCs, including the maids, contained intricate details since there had been plenty of guild members who were fond of elaborate settings, thanks to the fact that there were many illustrators, graphic designers, and programmers in Ainz Ooal Gown. They were able to obsess over the visuals and go all out. Originally, Sebastian and the maids were the last line of defense against the intruders. However, because they were unlikely to be able to stand against enemy players who managed to come this far, their only real purpose was to buy some time. But since no invaders were ever able to reach this point, they had never received orders, and had been just waiting endlessly in this place. Gripping his staff, Momonga felt pity towards these NPCs, even though that kind of thought was foolish. NPCs were simply data, and the only reason to believe they had emotions was due to their excellently designed AI. However,
A guildmaster should make his NPCs work.
while ridiculing himself for his arrogant comment, Momonga issued an order.
Follow me.
Sebastian and the maids respectfully bowed, showing they have accepted the command. The act of moving them from this location meant disregarding what the guild members had in mind at the start. Ainz Ooal Gown was a guild that emphasized on majority vote. It was forbidden for one person to mess around with what everyone had created together out of stubbornness. But today was the day everything would end. Momonga believed that everyone would forgive him if it was on such a day. Pondering these kinds of things, Momonga led the sound of several footsteps following him. Eventually, they arrived at a massive dome-shaped hall. A large, 4-colored crystal embedded in the ceiling was emitting rays of white light. There were 72 alcoves in the wall, most of them filled with statues. Every statue imitated the appearance of a devil, and there were 67 of them. This room was called the Lesser Key of Solomon, also known as the Lamageddon. It was taken from the title of a famous grimoire. The statues, modeled after the 72 demons of Solomon, were actually golems made from rare magical metals. The reason why there were only 67 golems instead of the original 72 was because the creator got sick and tired of the project part way. The 4-colored crystal set into the ceiling was in fact a monster. If an enemy invaded this place, it would summon high-tier elementals of earth, water, fire, and wind, and launch a bombardment of offensive wide-area magics. Combining everything, it had the power to easily eliminate 2 full parties, which was 12 people, of level 100 players. Indeed, this room was the last line of defense that protected the heart of Nazarick. Momonga walked across the Lemageddon with the servants, and arrived in front of a great gate on the other side. Towering over 5 meters, this majestic double door was meticulously engraved with a goddess on the left panel and a devil on the right panel. The engraving was so vivid that it felt they would jump out of the door and start attacking. Although it seemed like they could move, Momonga knew they weren't actually able to.
If they make it to this point, let's give the heroes a grand welcome. There's a lot of players saying we're evil and whatnot, so why not wait for them majestically inside like final bosses?
It was because this proposal had been approved with a majority vote, and the proposer was...
Ulbert.
Among all the guild members, Ulbert Helene Odell was a person who fixated on the word evil the most.
That guy just never got through adolescence.
Taking a look around the hall, that was quite evident to Momonga.
Okay. You're not gonna attack me, right?
His words were full of anxiety, and he was right to be so. Even Momonga didn't completely grasp all the inner workings of this maze. It wouldn't be a surprise if some members left behind something strange as a retirement gift. The person who designed this door was that kind of person. There was this one time where they activated a powerful golem made by that person, and it turned out that its combat AI was bugged, causing it to suddenly attack everything around it. However, Momonga remained skeptical and believed the error had been intentional.
Hey, Lucifer, if you attack me today, of all days, I'll be royally pissed off.
Momonga carefully touched the door, but his worries had been groundless. Befitting of its grandeur, the door opened slowly as though it was automatic. The atmosphere suddenly changed. The ambience until now had resembled a shrine with its tranquility and solemnity, but the sight in front of him surpassed even that. It felt as if the change in ambience was overwhelming him. Its interior was enormous, a space wide enough to fit hundreds of people with room to spare, and a ceiling so high that you had to look all the way up. The walls were white, adorned with a variety of golden embellishments. Hanging from the ceiling, rows of opulent chandeliers crafted from rainbow-colored gems gave off a fantastical brilliance. From the ceiling to the floor, a total of 41 giant banners with different patterns decorated the walls. There was a low stairway that had about 10 steps at the innermost area of the room, lavished with gold and silver, and at the top stood a majestic throne that seemed as though it was cut from a gigantic crystal. On the wall behind it was a huge, dark red banner embroidered with the guild's coat of arms. This was the great underground tomb of Nazarick's deepest and most important place, the throne room.
Wow.
Even Momonga was in awe with the magnitude of the room. He was convinced that its scale was probably ranked first or second in Yggdrasil. This room was the perfect place to face the final moments. Momonga stepped into the hall. It was so vast that it felt as if it would swallow every sound of his footsteps, and then he turned his eyes to the female NPC standing next to the throne. Clothed in a pure white dress, she was a beautiful woman with the face of a goddess. In contrast to her dress, she had a lustrous jet-black hair flowing down to her waist. Although her golden irises and vertically split pupils were peculiar, she was an impeccable beauty. However, on her left and right temples were 2 thick horns protruding crookedly, and on her waist were black angel wings. Perhaps due to the shadow cast by the horns, her goddess-like smile seemed like a mask, concealing her true self. She wore a golden spiderweb necklace that covered her shoulders and chest. Donned in a silky glove, her slender hand was holding a strange object that appeared to be a wand. It was about 45 centimeters long, and extending from its tip, a black sphere was floating in the air. Her name, Momonga had not forgotten. Her name was Albedo, the overseer of the floor guardians of the great underground tomb of Nazarick. she was an NPC that supervised the 7 floor guardians, and that meant she ranked above all other NPCs in the great underground tomb of Nazarick. It was for this reason that she was allowed to stand by in the throne room. Momonga looked at Albedo with his sharp eyes and wondered.
I knew there was one world item here, but why are there 2?
In all of Yggdrasil, there were only 200 world-class items. Each of them had their own unique ability, and some were powerful enough to destroy the game balance. Of course, not all of the world-class items had such game-breaking abilities. Even so, if a player managed to get hold of a world-class item, that player's reputation in Yggdrasil would jump to the highest level. Ainz Ooal Gown had 11 of these items, and it was also the guild with the most legendary items in their possession. Compared to other guilds, there was quite a gap, since the guild after them only had 3. With the approval from his guild members, Momonga possessed 1 of these ultimate items. The rest were scattered inside Nazarick, the majority of them lying asleep deep inside the treasury under the protection of avatars. There was only one explanation as to how Albedo had gotten hold of such secret treasure without Momonga knowing. It had been given to her by the guild member who created her. Ainz Ooal Gown was a guild that emphasized on majority vote. It was forbidden for one person to move the treasures that everyone had gathered together as one pleased. Along with a slight displeasure, Momonga thought about taking it back. But today was the last day, and after taking into account how much Albedo was treasured by his companion, he decided to ignore the issue.
That's far enough.
Having arrived at the stairs leading to the throne, Momonga solemnly ordered Sebastian and the Pleiades to stop following him. As soon as he started to climb a few steps, he noticed the footsteps still following behind him. Momonga couldn't help but smile bitterly. Of course, the expression on his skull did not change at all. NPCs didn't understand any commands outside of their original programming. You had to use a specific word in order for them to accept the command. Having forgotten about it, Momonga realized that he hasn't ordered NPCs around in a long time. After his guild members left, Momonga hunted alone and gathered funds to maintain Nazarick. He didn't build any friendships with other players, even going as far as to avoid them. He also avoided the dangerous areas his guild members used to frequent. Day after day, he was constantly earning money and putting it into the treasury until he logged out. There was almost no contact with the NPCs.
Stand by.
The footsteps stopped. After Momonga gave the correct command, he climbed the final steps in front of him to the throne. Momonga gazed unreservedly at Albedo, who stood next to him. He rarely visited this room in the past, so he never paid any special attention to her before.
I wonder what kind of setting she has.
The only thing Momonga remembered about Albedo was her role as the overseer of the Floor Guardians, and that she was the highest-ranking NPC in the great underground tomb of Nazarick. Struck by curiosity, Momonga operated his console and perused Albedo's detailed setting. A dense array of text flooded his vision. Its length was equivalent of an epic poem. It seemed like reading it all slowly would take him past the server shutdown. With the feeling of having stepped on a landmine, Momonga's unmoving face started to tremble. Deep in his heart, he wanted to scold himself for forgetting that the member who designed Albedo was an extremely meticulous person. But since he already started reading, he decided to see it through to the end. Paying no attention to the actual content, he skimmed the walls of text in a flash. After skipping past all the lengthy texts, Momonga finally reached the last part of her setting. But after reading what was written down, his train of thought came to a sudden stop.
By the way, she's a bitch.
He was at a loss for words.
Huh? What the heck?
Momonga could not help but to shout. Holding on to his doubts, he read it several times, but it was still the same sentence. Even after several moments of pondering the matter, he couldn't think of any other interpretation.
It's gotta be bitch. The insult.
Each of the 41 guild members had been in charge of the settings for at least one NPC. Was it possible that one of them had decided on such a setting for their own character? Momonga was bewildered. Perhaps he would be able to find a different meaning behind it after carefully reading the entire text. But among his guild members, there were indeed people who would come up with such a distinctive and strange setting. One of those people was Tabula Smaragdina, the creator of Albedo.
So, you're still into that unexpected contrast. Hey, Tabula.
Every NPC made by a member was part of the guild's legacy. Momonga felt disheartened about Albedo, who was ranked first among the NPCs, having such a setting. Was it okay for him to modify an NPC that a guild member had created dearly? After giving it some thought, Momonga came to a conclusion.
I'm gonna change it.
Now that he had the guild weapon in his possession, he was truly the guild master. It should be okay for him to exercise his prerogative. Momonga's hesitation vanished with his unreasonable logic that he should fix the errors of his guild members. Momonga stretched out the hand he was holding the staff with. Normally, he would have to use the editing tool to change a setting, but because right now he was using his guildmaster privileges, he was able to access it directly. Operating his console, he erased the sentence immediately.
I guess that'll do.
While looking at the empty space in Albedo's setting, Momonga thought for a moment.
Maybe I should put something in. This is so stupid.
Laughing at the idea that popped up in his mind, he typed on the console's keypad. It was a single sentence.
She is also in love with Momonga. How embarrassing.
Hiding his face behind his hands, Momonga felt extremely embarrassed about his action. It was like programming his ideal girlfriend complete with a love plot. Although he wanted to rewrite it at first, he decided to go with it. Today, the game will end, and the feeling of embarrassment will soon fade away. In the end, the part he deleted and added were about the same length. If there were some blank parts left over, Momonga would have felt bad about it. Sitting on the throne, embarrassed and somewhat satisfied, Momonga looked around the room and noticed that Sebastian and the maids were standing motionless. Even though they were together in the same place, it still felt a little desolate. Momonga remembered a command he never used in the past. He held out his hand and slowly moved it down.
Kneel.
Albedo, Sebastian, and the Pleiades genuflected simultaneously.
Everything is set.
Momonga raised his left hand to look at the holographic clock. 23:55:48.
Just in time for the last moments.
A GM has probably begun broadcasting and shooting fireworks outside.
But sitting inside here reminiscing, completely isolated from the outside world, Momonga had no way of knowing. Momonga leaned back on the throne and slowly looked up at the ceiling. Considering how this was the legendary base that had destroyed the great expedition force in the past, Momonga thought that maybe there were some players who might try to invade Nazarick on the final day. He was waiting to accept the last challenge as the guild master. Although he had sent emails to his old companions, almost none of them showed up. He was waiting to welcome his companions one last time as the guild master.
Is this guild just a relic of the past?
Momonga thought inside his heart. The guild was now an empty shell, but he still had a great time in the long run. His eyes looked at the huge banners hanging from the ceiling. Their total was 41. One banner for every guild member, each with its own design. Momonga lifted his fleshless finger and pointed at one of the banners.
Me.
Then he moved his finger towards the banner next to it. That one belonged to one of Ainz Ooal Gown's, to one of Yggdrasil's strongest players, the guild's founder, and the one who once brought together the first 9.
Touch me.
Next, he pointed at the banner of the person who was a university professor in the real world, and also the oldest person in Ainz Ooal Gown.
Death Suzaku.
His finger moved faster and faster, pointing out the banners that belonged to one of Ainz Ooal Gown's 3 female members.
Ankoro Mochi Mochi.
Momonga smoothly recited the names of the banners' owners.
Herohero, Peroroncino, Bubbling Teapot, Tabula Smaragdina, the Warrior Takamakazuchi, Variable Talisman, Genjiro.
Remembering the names of his 40 companions wasn't very difficult for Momonga. The names of his friends were still deeply imprinted into his mind. Momonga tiredly leaned back into the throne.
Yeah, we had fun.
On top of the monthly fees, Momonga spent almost 1/3 of his monthly salary on cash purchases. It wasn't like his income was especially high, it was just that he didn't have any other interests, so he spent most of his money on Yggdrasil. The game had a system where players could pay a fee in order to participate in a lottery to win a rare item, and Momonga had spent most of his money on this. After many expenses, he managed to get many different rares, but after hearing that one of his guild members managed to win the lottery using only his lunch money, Momonga was green with envy. Since every member of Ainz Ooal Gown was a working member of society, everyone had spent money on cash purchases, but Momonga was in a league of his own. He was addicted to it that much. Going on adventures were interesting, but freely roaming about with his friends was the most fun out of it all. For Momonga, who had no friends or remaining family in the real world, his memories of the time he spent with his friends in Ainz Ooal Gown were all he had. Today, that guild would disappear. With a heart full of dismay and regret, he clenched the hand holding the staff. Momonga was just a normal person. He didn't have any financial power or connections that could change this fact. He could only wait silently as time ran out for all the players on the server. The holographic clock read 23:57. The server was ending at 000.
Time is running out. This virtual world will end, and I will return to my everyday life. This is obvious. People can't live in a virtual world, so everyone will have to leave. Sooner or later. I'll have to get up at 4 a.m. tomorrow. I need to go to sleep after the servers shut down so that it won't affect my work.
Midnight. 23:59:35. 36. 37. Momonga slowly counted the seconds. 23:59:48. 49. 50. Momonga shut his eyes. 23:59:58. 59. With the clock counting the remaining seconds, he waited for the end of this fantasy world, and the eventual forced logout. 00000. 1, 2, 3.
Huh?
Momonga opened his eyes. He was not back in his familiar room. He was still sitting in the throne room within Yggdrasil.
What's going on?
The time was correct. Right now, he should be forcefully logged out from the server shutdown. 00038. It was already past the announced time, and unless there was a system error, it was impossible to get it wrong. Momonga looked around confusedly, searching for an explanation.
Was the shutdown postponed?
Various explanations came to his mind, but none of them seemed to be the correct answer. The most probable explanation appeared to be a delayed server shutdown due to an error in the system. If that were the case, a GM should have made a statement by now. Momonga hurriedly tried to find any news on the shutdown in the chat channel, but stopped abruptly. There was no control interface.
What the?
Although Momonga felt anxious and confused, he was also a little surprised by his own calmness. He tried all the functions used in the game: forced system access, chat, call GM, logout, and so on. Nothing was working. It felt as if he was completely removed from the system.
What the hell is happening here?
His angry shout echoed in the throne chamber and then faded away. For such a thing to happen on the last day, when everything was supposed to end, were the developers actually tricking everyone? Momonga's voice was furious, and he felt frustrated from being unable to meet a glorious end. Usually, there should have been no response to his furious exclamation. However...
Is everything alright, Lord Momonga?
It was the first time Momonga ever heard this sweet female voice. Although shocked, Momonga started looking for the source of the voice. When he found out who it was, he was left speechless. The response came from an NPC, It was Albedo.
Carne Village. It was located on the border of the Kingdom at the Empire, near the southern tip of the Yggdrasil mountain range, just outside a patch of woodland named the Great Forest of Tob. For a frontier village of the Riestes Kingdom, its population was unexceptional. 120 souls, distributed among 25 families. The village made its living from the resources of the forest and agriculture. Apart from doctors and herbalists who came to collect herbs, the only visitors to the village were the yearly tax collectors. Time seemed to stand still for the few residents of this village. Village life was very busy, even in the early hours of the morning. Villages did not possess the magical illumination of continual light, which could be found in cities. So the villagers would rise with the sun and work hard all day until the sun went down. The first thing Emmot did after getting up extra early in the morning was to carry water from the nearby well. Hauling water was a woman's job, and once she finished filling the big water tank in the house, the chore was complete. By this time, her mother would have prepared breakfast for their family of 4. Breakfast was barley or wheat porridge, as well as cooked vegetables. Sometimes they would have dried fruit as well. After breakfast, she would tend the fields with her parents. Her 10-year-old sister would go into the forest to gather firewood or help with the field work. When the bell in the middle of the village square, rang to signal noon, everyone would break for lunch. Lunch would be black bread baked several days before, as well as soup with some shredded meat jerky sprinkled in. Field work would resume after lunch, and when the sun set, they would return home for dinner. For dinner, they would have the same black bread that they had for lunch, as well as bean soup. If the village's hunters managed to bag any prey, they might be able to get some meat to go with their dinner. After dinner, the family would gather around the light of the hearth fire to take care of household chores, such as mending worn or damaged clothes. They would go to sleep around 8. The girl, Emmot, was born 16 years ago and had become a part of the village since then. She had lived these days all her life. In her heart, she wondered, how much longer will these unchanging days continue? Today was no different from any other. After waking up, Enri went to the well to carry water. After filling her buckets at the well, she would need 3 trips to fill the house's water tank. Enri rolled up her sleeves, exposing her untanned skin, which was pale and stood out. Long years of farm life ensured that although her arms looked slender and frail, they were actually very strong, with just a hint of muscle on them. The filled buckets were very heavy, but Enri hoisted them up like she always did.
If the buckets were bigger, I could make fewer trips. Wouldn't that make things easier? Then again, if the buckets were bigger, I probably wouldn't be able to lift them.
As Enri thought about that issue on her way back home, she heard a sound and turned to look at it. There was tension in the air over there, and the seeds of fear began sprouting in her heart. Her ears seemed to pick up something, like wood being broken. And after that...
A scream?
It sounded like a strangled bird, but there was no way it could be a bird's call. A chill ran down Enri's spine. Unbelievable. There must be some kind of mistake. It couldn't be a human's voice. She tried to erase her unease with these thoughts, and then they vanished. She had to run to the source of the scream, because it was coming from the direction of her home. Erin cast aside the water buckets. She could not run while carrying that heavy burden. Although she nearly tripped over her long skirt, she managed to keep her balance by some stroke of luck. The sound rang through the air once more. Enri's heart lurched in her chest. There was no mistake about it. It was a human scream. She ran and ran and ran. Enri could not recall going faster than this in her life. She was running so fast that her legs were about to tangle each other up. The neighs of horses, the screams of people, and shouts. These sounds were becoming clearer and clearer. In the distance, Enri could see an unfamiliar man in armor swinging his sword at a villager. The villager collapsed to the ground with a howl of pain, like a puppet whose strings had been cut, and a swift thrust from the sword dealt him a fatal blow.
Morga!
There were no strangers in a small village like this. Everyone was as close as kin, As such, Enri knew exactly who had been killed before her eyes. Mr. Morga was a loud but pleasant man. He had done nothing wrong and did not deserve to die like this. Enri wanted to stop, but in the end she gritted her teeth and ran on. The distance that felt fairly close while carrying water now felt like an endless stretch. As the sounds of shouts and cursing filtered into her ears, she finally saw her home before her.
Dad! Mom! Nemu!
Enri opened the door as she shouted for her family. She found 3 familiar faces, with unfamiliar looks of fear. They were motionless. However, when Enri opened the door and entered, their faces softened, the fear replaced by relief.
Enri, are you alright?
Her father hugged her in his strong arms, which were brawny and tough from field work.
Okay, now that Enri's here, let's get out of here.
The Emmot family was in grave danger. They had stayed at home because they were worried about leaving Enri behind, and so they had missed the best chance to escape. The threat to their lives would be catching up with them any moment now. As she thought about that fear, it became a reality. Just as the family was about to run, a human figure appeared in the house's doorway. The man, silhouetted by sunlight, glittered. He was a fully armored knight, whose breastplate bore the insignia of the Baharuth Empire. He held a longsword in his hand. The Baharuth Empire was a neighbor of the Riestes kingdom, and the two of them had waged frequent wars against each other. Until recently, the flames of war were mostly limited to the region around the fortress city of Yggdrasil, and had not spread to this village. However, the quiet life they had enjoyed would end here. Enri could feel the man's cold eyes on her from between the vision slits of his helmet, as though he were counting up how many people were in Enri's family. It frightened her. The knight clenched the gauntlet holding his sword, and a creaking sound came from where metal rubbed against metal. And then, just as he was about to enter the house...
No!
Her father lunged at the man, tackling him out of the doorway and out of the house with his momentum.
Hurry up and run!
Damn you.
Blood streamed from a small cut on her father's face. He must have gotten hurt while bull-rushing the knight. Enri's father was rolling around as he grappled with the knight on the ground. The knight grabbed the hand of Enri's father, which was holding a knife, while he in turn kept the knight from drawing his short sword. The sight of blood on the body of one of her family members made Enri's mind go white. She wavered over whether to help her father or run away.
Enri! Nemu!
Her mother's shouts returned Enri to her senses, and as she looked at her mother, she saw the older woman shaking her head, with a heartbreaking expression on her face. Enri grabbed her little sister's hand and ran after her mother with big strides. Guilt and hesitation clawed at her heart, but in the end, she knew they had to flee into the great forest of Tob. The neighing of horses, angry shouts, the clash of steel, and the stench of burning flesh. All these assaulted Enri's ears and nose from the direction of the village. Where had it come from? Enri ran with all her might as she tried to make sense of matters. When fleeing to an open space, she had to make her body as small as possible, or hide in the corners of houses. The violent beating of her heart chipped away at the fear that threatened to freeze her body solid. In addition, the small hand she held in hers spurred her on. Her sister. Her mother, who was running ahead of her, suddenly froze and immediately doubled back, her hands frantically gesturing at them to run somewhere else. As Enri realized why her mother would do that, she bit her lip and forced back her tears. She clenched her little sister's hand and ran, trying desperately to get away from here, because she did not want to see what would happen next.
We have got quite the mystery going on. Momonga finds himself in a strange new world. The NPCs are speaking. What is going on? Enri finds herself in a life-or-death situation. Will she and her sister be able to escape Carne? Well, we'll just have to save those questions for next time. Now, let's read off these credits here. The female narrator was played by ZtefHazeVA. The male narrator was played by Virly. Enri Emmot was played by JenaLapis. Momonga was played by Thepeachgod. Herohero was played by Daily Eraser. Albedo and Enri's mother was played by Kassandra Cherry. Enri's father was played by Vidair Memoria. The lich voice of Ainz was played by Syckniss. The cover of the intro was done by Nate Wants to Battle. The instrumentals of the outro was done by Noaon. Additional music was composed by Shuji Katayama. We hope you enjoyed part 1 of this audiobook. See you next time! Long live Ainz Ooal Gown!